It gives me a great. We are recording here.
Sure, sure.
It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Professor Eva Loreng. She is here today, and I am a discussant of the book Diaspora and Soft Power: Influence of Indian American Elites in U.S. Foreign Policy, authored by Dr. Eva Loreng. First, let me introduce our platform. Uh, Speaking from Margin is a student collective and academic platform for research scholars, social political activists, and students to engage with contemporary discourse of social sciences. It attempts to build academic solidarity for social justice in higher education. We use this space to build solidarity among researchers from various marginal locations to engage with the evolving knowledge paradigm of social sciences. In our collective, researchers from non-traditional backgrounds, mostly from marginal communities, participate to gain a deeper understanding of research methods, conceptualizations, uh, and theorizations in the diverse field of social science. In our previous sessions, we received overwhelming responses from our participants, research scholars from different regional, uh, state, and central universities of India attended our sessions. Let me introduce the author, Dr. Eva Loreng. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
For me, Dr.
Thank you.
Eva Loreng has been a faculty member of international politics at the School of International Studies, Central University of Gujarat since 2017. Prior to this, she has taught as an assistant professor at several colleges of University of Delhi. Uh, she completed her master's and MPhil from School of International Studies, JNU. She recently completed her PhD from School of Developmental Studies, TIS, Mumbai. Her research explores culture, diaspora, security, migration, refugees, and soft power. This book that we are introducing today, Diaspora and Soft Power: Influence of Indian American Elites in U.S. Foreign Policy, published by Springer Nature, is her first book and an extension of her PhD research. Apart from this, she also has been a voice artist and was recently invited by All India Radio New Delhi to speak on India and G20. Also, she has been recognized with the Janjatiya Gaurav Award for her academic contribution. Now, let me give a brief about the what the book argues. What are the central argument about of the book? Dr. Loreng challenges the common view of the soft power as a mainly cultural or image based, highlighting instead the strategic political engagement of Indian American elites such as political, business, and intellectual elites who use network, resources, and advocacy to influence U.S. foreign policy. She shifts the focus from soft power as attraction to structured political engagement based on extensive empirical research, including in-depth interviews with individuals involved in political fundraising and advocacy. The book grounds its analysis in real practice and credibility. Historically, Dr. Loreng traces Indian American influence from the colonial period through the Cold War and post-Cold War era, culminating the U.S. India nuclear deal, illustrating how diaspora influence is shaped by global shift, U.S. politics, and Indian foreign policy. Now, ma'am, over to you. The format will be 40 to 50 minutes for you to speak about the book, and further we will have 20 to 25 minutes for the participants for question and answer. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ramzan, for the warm introduction. And before I start sharing about my book, I must share that Speaking from Margin is the first platform which has provided me with this opportunity to talk about my book. And I express my sincere gratitude to them for this opportunity. It is certainly very encouraging for first timers like me. I would also like to thank everyone who has taken out time from their busy schedules and given up on their afternoon weekend siesta and joined us for the book discussion today. All of your support truly means a lot. And yes, I'm slightly nervous. It's my first book, and I'm doing this for the first time in my life. So kindly bear with me if I fumble or get stuck or quiver. And as
Mm.
Ramzan just mentioned, that I have to speak for around 40 to 50 minutes. But if I finish way early, then please don't grill me with extra questions. And if I overshoot, then please don't kill me. So, without any further delays, I would move towards the book discussion. So, the first question that comes up is obviously like, why this book? So, it's an outcome of my PhD, as mentioned by Ramzan as well. And probably this is the natural way of progression for any PhD once it's completed. Or maybe it's a way like, you can take your work to a larger audience. But on a serious note, when the study actually started, that is during my PhD, the key question was that there is abundance of literature being produced on the concepts of diaspora and soft power, individually as well as interlinking the two. Moreover, majority of such literature talks about Indian diaspora being a source of soft power for India. So why should I contribute to this literature? And if I'm doing so, then is there something new that I am bringing to the table? So after again and again, like going through the existing academic and popular literature, what we realize that it does have epistemological shortcomings, uh, which should be overcome to methodologically demonstrate the interlinkage between exercise of soft power and the fulfillment of foreign policy goals. So, generally, evident gaps were that the diaspora communities were treated as homogeneous or uniform units. Their culture was assumed to be static. Likewise, cultural transfers were believed to be one way. And the selective engagement of governments with diaspora communities was conveniently overlooked. So, this book was an attempt to overcome these shortcomings. And the book comprises of 9 chapters, which is certainly more than the chapters which were there in the PhD. So the thesis comprised of 5 chapters, but for the book, 2 of the chapters were bifurcated to make it an easy read, as the audience for the book would not be confined to the academic fraternity. Uh, at least I'm hoping for that. So people generally tend to lose track when the chapters are very long. So which is why it was suggested by the Springer team as well to keep the length where people will be interested to read. So this is how like the 5 chapters of PhD turned into 9. The initial question to begin with was why and how diaspora communities have acquired the spotlight in the discourse on soft power, as there are numerous other sources of soft power which states have, such as cinema, educational programs, music, overseas campuses of universities, religion, sports, etc. And moreover, is this phenomenon common to like all diaspora communities? And if not, then why? So, diaspora communities are the inevitable ambassadors or torchbearers or carriers of the culture of their home state or the state of origin. As anthropologist Arjun Appadurai also had stated that humans, when they move, it is not only their physical movement, but also the movement of their culture and practices. Thus, in the host states, spaces are created for cultural interaction, exchange, and hybridity. There are also these are also like sites which manifest acceptance, assimilation, and integration of these communities in the host states. And it was important to take this view on this phenomena, as these factors, apart from relations between the home and the host states, determine the exercise of soft power by these communities. So, in comparison to other sources of soft power, diaspora communities enjoy a locational advantage, which is why the states do not have to make any extra investment in them to use them as a soft power tool for the target audience. In case of any of the other sources of power, states do have to make some or the other form of an investment. Moreover, diaspora communities can exercise soft power in direct as well as indirect model. So these categorizations of exercise of soft power were made by Joseph Nye himself, who gave us this very concept of soft power. And according to him, in the direct model, it's people who directly influence policymakers with their charisma. In the indirect model, cultural tools are used to favorably change the opinion of the target audience, and which in turn would influence the policymakers. Most sources of soft power operate in the indirect model, regarding which Joseph Nye himself stated that it's very difficult to determine the outcome of it. But in case of diaspora, the privilege was that it can exercise soft power in either of the models, which certainly is an advantage over the other sources of soft power. Moreover, diaspora communities are a soft power source primarily for the developing states, since migration operates along the core periphery pattern. So, what agencies like, say, the American Center or the British Council do for their respective states, the diaspora communities can do the same for particularly these developing states. The key difference is that in case of activities of these formal agencies like American Center and British Council, their activities are completely determined and controlled by the government. Certainly, the outcomes cannot be controlled, but the activities are. Whereas in case of diaspora communities, it may or may not be the case. But then, is this true for all the diaspora communities from all the developing states? So, what we arrived on was that certainly not. So, because had that been the case, then each developing state would have easily influenced policy decisions in the developed world. This is because the exercise of soft power by diaspora is dependent on factors like, say, the world order or the international political structure, the relations between the home and the host state. For example, say one of the interviewees pointed out, the Iranian diaspora in the US is ineffective in exercising soft power, primarily because of the relation between the two states. Further, policies of the home state and the host state towards their diaspora communities also play a pivotal role, something on which I'll elaborate when I discuss the Indian Americans. And lastly, the demographic composition of the diaspora is also crucial for effective exercise of soft power. As like in some cases, the numeric strength of these communities plays a significant role in making them, effective in exercising soft power. Then, of course, the labor composition of these communities is also crucial because that determines the financial and the intellectual strength of the community. And all these factors play an important role in developing them as a source of soft power. Besides this, these communities certainly need to have some amount of acceptance in the host states for the effective exercise of soft power. As Nai also had explained, that for any state to exercise soft power effectively, it needs to have credibility in the eyes of the target audience. And it is the same for the diaspora communities as well. So the exact conjunction of all these factors, which I just mentioned, like the world order or the international political structure, the relations between the states, the policies of the states, the demographic composition of the diaspora communities. So the exact conjunction between all these factors make a diaspora a source of soft power. And this is a key reason why this phenomenon is not true for all the diaspora communities, because either one or the other factor is either missing or lacking. And keeping this thing in mind, these diverse factors which are there, that was one of the first points when we realized that we need to take a very non-state centric view of this phenomenon, which is related to actually foreign policy making. Uh, So I hope I'm making sense so far, and I have the audience with me. I haven't put people to sleep. Uh, so, uh,
Yeah, it was clear.
yeah, okay. So, in case of the Indian Americans and the exercise of soft power, I began tracing with the evolution of this community in the US, and in this process, I made this argument that despite being an old diaspora in the US, the exercise of soft power by Indian Americans is a very recent phenomenon, as the exact conjunction of all these factors, which I just mentioned happened in context of the Indian Americans only in the contemporary times. So the Indians from South Asia, like firstly arrived in the US in the colonial age, but in this age they comprised of indentured labor, exiled freedom fighters, former members of the colonial army, employees of the merchant vessels or ships, traders, as well as students. In other words, there was a predominance of, say, unskilled or semi skilled labor, and which also indirectly reflects on the financial strength of this community at this point of time. On the other hand, the world order during this period was colonial, and it was absolutely unimaginable that a colony or its culture would hold credibility in the eyes of a state which was being governed by the Anglo Saxons. So, the Indian Americans, that's why in this age, this whole idea of soft power does not seem to be existing. Moreover, the Indian Americans did have a very small intellectual capital, but certainly not the financial capital. And this small group of intellectuals was absolutely invested in the freedom struggle in India. And they did organize themselves into associations and groups to contribute to the freedom struggle. And some of these associations and groups also occasionally carried out protests against issues like racial discrimination and so on. But then these were far and few in between. Besides this, in this age, the US, through policies of regulated immigration, was controlling any kind of, say, immigrants who were coming to the US. And this was completely driven by the fact that what kind of labor was required in the US. And in case of India, there was no policy it had towards its own diaspora or the overseas population. Because if we look at the documents of the British government, which was ruling India at this point, they keep referring to this community as overseas Indians, and the whole idea of diaspora was absent. So, in short, there was no scope to exercise soft power in this age. Now, there was no immediate change in these policies after the end of the imperial age. India, interestingly, had even like continued to distance itself from its diaspora. And like the scholar Iti Abraham argues, that this was a deliberate choice in order to display its support for ideas of nation state and sovereignty. The US also selectively relaxed its immigration policies. And one interesting development of this period was the election of Dalit Singh Sond to the House of Representatives, which in many writings is also cited as like signs of growing political presence of Indian Americans or their growing acceptance and visibility and so on. But then, as like many of the interviewees also pointed out, and as evident like from the historical developments, this was like an isolated development because after the election of Dalit Singh Son, for a long time there was no Indian American who had contested for the Congress. So again, like one cannot equate this with any kind of say, attaining a position to exercise soft power. Now, the primary changes followed with the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act in the US. Again, this was an outcome of the changing labor requirements in the US. And this act did away with all forms of immigration restrictions. And the immediate impact was the numeric growth of all diaspora communities, including the Indian Americans. So, the overall consequence of this act became visible or evident only in the next 2 decades. So, like it came in 1965 until by the end of the 1980s, I would say the impact started to become more visible. So, the Indian American community came to comprise of skilled labor. employed in white collar jobs as a consequence of this act. And this was also a manifestation of the improvement in the financial and the intellectual capital of this community. Consequentially, soon the Indian Americans began to organize themselves again into associations, groups, and organizations. In this initial phase, these associations, groups, and organizations were primarily culture or profession based, and only some of them were associated with social issues. An interesting fact was that the sub-identity factors remained very strong in the Indian American community. And by sub-identity factors, I'm referring to factors like, say, caste, class, ethnicity, language, region, and religion. And this is why, like, the community could never be like a very close-knit community, which had been the case with many of the other diaspora communities. And most of these cultural associations, groups, and organizations also were formed primarily along these lines. So, again, the divisions within the community were quite visible. So, fortunately, these divides had not creeped into the profession and social issue based association groups and organizations. And at some of the occasions, these associations, groups, and organizations even tried to say warm up with the American politicians. And I'm talking about the period of the 1980s. But then the efforts were very lackluster. Like one of the interviewees mentioned in context of one such association, he said that they had invited the city mayor for an event. And it was a very sad scene because most of the members of this association itself were either not present or they turned up very late. Now, further, the imperial era was definitely over, sorry, but its remnants continued to exist. And this was evident in the policies the US had towards the sorry, educational degrees of people from the developing world. And one of the interviewees shared, like in case of his own wife and several other Indian Americans, his wife was a doctor and who had several years of work experience in India. But she again had to completely redo her degrees in the US in order to get employed. And this was the case with most of the skilled labor which was reaching from India to the US at this point of time. And then again, when we look at, say, the acceptance or the assimilation of the Indian Americans, till this time, it was evident that this was also, halfway there, not like there was a thorough acceptance or there was a complete assimilation, and which was very evident in context of food, because despite the fact Indian restaurants were there, but the larger, say, the client base was amongst the Indians and not beyond that. Then, most importantly, the Cold War politics reflected in India US relations at this point of time. And which is why the states never like came close, or the diaspora was never thought of as a source of soft power. And India, due to domestic political reasons, continued to distance itself from its diaspora. So, certainly, the numeric, financial, and intellectual strength of this community and its visibility had improved after 1965. But then again, the idea of exercising soft power was a little far fetched. The most important changes, I would say, followed after the Cold War. So, the world order changed for sure, which transformed relations between states. And most of the bones of contention between India and the US were resolved. Both these states needed newer allies and they found perfect ones in each other. And by this time, India had also realized the importance of remittances, and which is why it consciously developed policies to engage with the diaspora. US also established the India Caucus in the Congress, and this was the first country-specific caucus which had ever come up. Interestingly, the American corporate lobby had played a very important role in its establishment. So it was quite evident that it's the corporate interest in the US which was growing towards India. And the Indian Americans, the role that they were playing was to bridge whatever gaps were there in order to, make this relationship flourish. The new addition to the Indian American community in terms of demography at this time was now the arrival of the highly skilled labor. So, till like, say, the 1980s, it was skilled labor. Now it was the highly skilled labor, which included a large number of the IT sector employees. Then, of course, there was an increase in number of Indian bankers as well. And as like one of the interviewees also pointed out, that Indian bankers are looked upon as very, trustworthy and reliable people.
We
So
have
this was, I'm sorry. Hello. Okay. Yeah, so they were looked upon as very reliable people. Then, of course, there was also an increase in the number of Indian American women, and most of them were reaching on the dependent visa or the H4 visa. And then, of course, there was a large number of, say, second generation Indian Americans who were graduating from the universities by the early 90s and the mid 1990s. So, by this time, the community came to comprise of several more layers, which were, say, an outcome of multiple waves of migration at different junctures of time. The assimilation and integration of all these layers varied. Many had acquired American citizenship, many were American citizens by birth at this point of time. But the divide, interestingly, based on the sub identity factors, also continued. In some cases, it even strengthened. However, when we look at advocacy, it started in this period and it was predominantly undertaken by the Indian Americans who were leading these community associations, groups, and organizations. And they had emerged as community leaders and were also like this point of connect or contact between the community and the American administration. And moreover, due to their professional networks, they had developed this access to this policy making circle in the US. Now, one of the first occasions when the Indian Americans influenced policy decision was when the Limited Test Ban Treaty or the LTBT was introduced in the Congress. They had successfully advocated against its implementation, and at this point, I would like to also like to say, emphasize that Indian Americans have always advocated for policy related issues. They've never lobbied. This is something which all the interviewees unanimously pointed out, as lobbying in the US is a legal activity which is carried out by formally registered firms. Yes, in case of the LTBT, the Indian government had sought the help of Indian Americans as well as professional lobbying firms, but what the Indian Americans did, that is, the Indian American elites did, was essentially advocating for the non implementation of this treaty. Further, as it became evident from the interview narratives and the newspaper stories that only a small section of Indian Americans were engaging with this advocacy because only they had that kind of, say, intellectual and financial capital to do so. So the question was, what exactly had changed for the small group that suddenly they were engaging with this, and how did it dawn upon them that they can also influence policy decisions? So, as pointed out in the interviews by some of the senior members of the community, the Indian Americans had started undertaking political fundraising by this time, a practice which is legal and common in the US. So, the more funds you give to a political participant or a contestant, the better your position is to influence policies. The Indian Americans certainly took time to adapt to this practice. Firstly, because the initial immigrants did not have financial capital to do so. And secondly, due to the unfamiliarity with this practice. And as one of the interviewees pointed out, in the 1980s, the Indian Americans would raise funds to primarily invite Bollywood celebrities for performances, but would not care about raising political funds. As in India, I mean, he said, like, we were not familiar with this practice. But then, as I said before, by the mid 1990s, a sizable number of second generation Indian Americans had also emerged. And for them, this was a familiar practice. So that's how these dynamics were like changing. So the conjunction of factors, which I previously mentioned, so a space was being getting created rather for this exact conjunction so that this community, the small section of the elites in them, could exercise soft power in the direct model. The second occasion when they successfully influenced policy was after Pokhran 2. So the US, as we all know, had imposed sanctions on India, and there was immense pressure on India to sign the CTBT and the NPT. And it was very tricky to convince the American administration and politicians at this time, as majority of the American politicians, even members of the India caucus, had distanced themselves from the Indian Americans. So, as narrated by one of the interviewees, they shortlisted the congressmen from the areas which had dominant numbers of Indian American voters. Obviously, they could influence their decision. They also shortlisted American politicians who had received or were receiving good amount of political funds from the Indian Americans. And keeping in mind all these interests, most of the congressmen actually agreed to have a meeting with the Indian Americans. And consequently, like what followed was the Clinton visit to India, in which again, for the very first time, President Clinton was accompanied by a large number of these business elites, Indian American business elites in the US. Again, they were looked upon as people who would bridge the communication between the Indian and the American administrations. So this was like the turnaround period. Now, on a lighter note, I've like, I'll just mention it here. One of the interviewees mentioned that when Pokhran 2 had happened, the initial reaction or the very first reaction which President Clinton gave was that, how will I eat at Bombay Palace now? Now, Bombay Palace was a popular Indian restaurant in the US, and President Clinton and his daughter were very fond of it. Now, if you scratch the surface, you realize that, having information about these personal likes and dislikes of policymakers is also a reflection of the proximity these respondents or interviewees shared with them. So, obviously, it was quite clear that there was this space for interaction created between the American administration and the Indian American elites. And then, of course, came the India US nuclear deal, the turning point in India US relations. And the turning point in the sense that because it's that point when the idea or the discourse on Indian Americans being a source of soft power for India gained momentum. So some of the interviewees were drawn by the US administration to draft the deal because of their expertise in this area. They certainly were the intellectual elites from the Indian American community, but they were not exercising soft power. And I'm saying this because they were predominantly fulfilling their professional duties. And one such interviewee emphasized that, how he had this ringside view of these negotiations. He also added that the role played by the Indian American community was minimal in the nuclear deal, and it was primarily the corporate interest which had is eventually made the deal a success. He explained that it was due to the efforts of the Indian American elites, the negotiations did gain momentum. People were certainly convinced, but had it not been for the interest of the corporate sector or the administration, simply say advocacy efforts of these Indian Americans would not have taken us anywhere. But then, if we look at the nuclear deal negotiations, so compared to the previous occasions, during this time, the advocacy efforts were much better streamlined. And they were led by these two groups. One was this informal group called U.S. India Friendship Council, which was under Swadesh Chatterjee, a senior member of this community. And there was the second group, which was the formal organization called the U.S. India Political Action Committee, or USINPAC, which was led by Sanjay Puri. They certainly led separate campaigns, but then the goal was the same. At a large scale, both these groups and organizations, they held events to discuss the pros and cons of the deals. They publicized about the deal as much as possible. They even gave newspaper advertisements in order to, bring this into discourse and debate. Then members of USIFC and USINPAC used their personal rappos also to convince congressmen and to persuade them about the deal. And one of the most interesting cases in this context is of Dr. R.D. Prabhu, who was the personal physician of Senate Minority Leader called Harry Reid, who was a Democrat from Nevada. And he was personally approached by the then Indian Ambassador Ronan Sen and Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to persuade the senator for the deal. Likewise, Ashok Mago and Durga Agarwal had led campaigns in Texas, which again has a sizable Indian population. Then Ken and Kavel Bajaj and Swadesh Chatterjee also held fundraisers for many of these American politicians, including Joe Biden, who, like, since that time had been trying to, contest for the presidential office. I'm talking about the period of 2006. Then there was Ramesh Kapoor from Massachusetts, who made the best of his rapport to persuade Senator John Kerry. Besides this, there was Indiana-based oncologist Dr. Bharat Barai, a senior community leader also, who worked to persuade particularly Senator Evan Bay. Similarly, the Mississippi senior Indian American community leader Dr. Sampath Shivangi worked to convince Senators Trent Lott and Thad Cochran. Another riveting fact about the advocacy was the role played by the American Jewish community, or the AJC. And they were interested in the deal because this was also the time when India Israel relations were seeing an upswing. So, Indian Jews who were working with the AJC played an important role in advocating for the deal. And as pointed out by one such interviewee, he added that, we carried out door to door campaigns for the deal at the Capitol Hill in order to convince all these congressmen. So the entire advocacy campaign went on for around 4 years, with a small break in between when the bill had reached the Indian Parliament for debate. But post that, when it returned to the US, there was a very small margin of time before the Congress would break for the presidential elections. And again, it was tricky, like, how to get the deal through. Because had the election vote started, then again, it would have been delayed, then a new administration would have come, and it would have delayed the matters. But then again, as the interviewees pointed out, that they were quickly able to gather themselves again into this informal group, and they managed to, find or fix meetings with congressmen, and eventually this deal was like a I mean this deal was signed, and as they say, rest is history. And as many of these interviewees, they concluded the narration about the nuclear deal, they're very fondly reminiscing how the deal was celebrated at Capitol Hill, and many of them pointed out that how samosas and mango lassis were served in order to celebrate the success of the deal. Now, many also added that this was very symbolic because the inclusion of Indian food also was a reflection of the changing approach US was having towards India and Indian Americans. So, 17 years have passed since the signing of the nuclear deal, but the discourse on Indian Americans being a source of soft power has only widened. One of the interviewees proudly stated that India Day parades are held in New York. Then, of course, the Empire State Building is lit in tricolor on every 15th August. Then, Sanskrit shlokas are also chanted on several occasions in the White House. And this is nothing but Indian soft power. Another interviewee added, like, shows like, say, Never Have I Ever, which has this Indian origin character as a central character, was almost unimaginable or would have never found an audience had it come, say, a few years ago. Again, it reflects the kind of acceptance and the visibility the Indian Americans have in the US contemporarily. So other interviews also added that the soft power is constantly at play, with the efforts of, say, the Sikh Gurdwaras or the Chenmai Mission, who fed so many people during the COVID times, and this was absolutely free. However, Milan Vaishnav and another interviewee also cautioned that how cultural connect with the home or the ancestral state weakens with the succeeding generations. And one cannot overlook how the succeeding generations are inevitable sites of cultural hybridity. Like an interviewee explained, they are ethnic Indians, and in their thought processes, they are Americans. Definitely, this may vary for individuals, but one cannot ignore the fact that their daily life choices and decisions are determined by their reality in the US and not by US India relations. Again, like Milan Vaishnav explained in case of Sri Preston Kulkarni, a Democrat from Texas who lost elections in 2020. And this was the re-election he was seeking after 2018, but he lost. So Milan Vaishnav added that it was discovered that Kulkarni was receiving funds from the HSS, and which was considered not in line with the American values. And the eventual outcome was that he lost the elections. So again, he said that there are multiple factors at play when we talk about the Indian soft power. And again, this point also led to the fact that when a culture travels with the migrants, even the negatives of the culture reach overseas. And in case of India, unfortunately, it is the caste divide which has reached overseas as well. And in case of the Indian American community, with the recent cases related to caste and caste-based discrimination, again, this is something, which is adversely impacting the soft power potential of this community because it's hampering the credibility which it had had for so long. So, yes, Indian Americans have been a source of soft power for India. What the situation will be in future, only time can tell. To conclude, I would say that the book offers a fresh, non status look at a foreign policy phenomenon. It uses an interdisciplinary approach to develop a holistic understanding of this phenomenon. The patterns displayed in the phenomenon took us to C.W. Mills's elite theory, Gramsci's cultural hegemon, and Charles Tilley's trust networks. This was also because within IR, we do not have theories which can provide a complete explanation for this phenomenon. This was also practical because diaspora as a concept is studied across social sciences disciplines. And so is the case with culture, which is a primary tool of soft power. And then, of course, for primary data collection, life history interviews were conducted because we needed to capture the individual stories of the interviewees. However, due to the pandemic situation, the fieldwork had to be conducted online. But then the advantage was that both the interviewees and me, we were sitting in the comfort of our living rooms and having a conversation. And the most fortunate thing was that despite I was studying up or, talking to all these influential people, the interviewees spoke very candidly, which simply eased my fieldwork. Now, if I think of it, I do feel maybe had I done it in person, uh, the interviewees or the respondents could have had reservations in speaking about a lot of things. And then, of course, we used narrative analysis techniques like conversation, discourse, and linguistic analysis to draw themes, etc., from these interview narratives. So as I'm narrating now, the whole process of doing this interdisciplinary study sounds very straightforward, but let me tell you, it was nothing. It was nowhere close to being, say, smooth or easy. So Ritamra ma'am, my supervisor, who's here in the meeting also today, so she knows it well, how she had to convince me about the interdisciplinary approach. And yes, I'm saying that my supervisor had to convince me because normally it's the other way around that the students try to convince the supervisors or the mentors. But for me, it was this way. And this was also because of the rigidity we have as academicians, because we become very territorial about our disciplines and the way we are conditioned also, we very often fail to see that concepts are not bounded by disciplinary boundaries. They are beyond that. And which is why we need to, develop this holistic understanding. But yeah, when obviously it was still under discussion, the PhD was going on. Again and again, I would think why are we pushing for sociology and literature to study a foreign policy related phenomenon? So after thorough long hours of discussions, eventually one day I had this eureka moment, and then of course this interdisciplinary approach made absolute sense to me. And then of course the work progressed like that. And for the book, of course, I conducted more interviews. I mean, for the PhD also, I did a couple of interviews, but then it had to be finished in a limited period of time. But for the book, of course, when I got the time, I conducted more interviews in order to like add to the existing narratives. So on this note, I will rest my case. And once again, a big hearty thanks to Speaking from Margin for this opportunity. And thanks to everybody who has joined today for this book discussion. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. This was a very enlightened and fruitful presentation. Uh, am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The book basically contributes and highlights, I think, key points that I noted. First, it enriches soft power literature with an elite-centric model, bridging international relations, diaspora studies, and political sociology and all. And I think the second point that I have to mention that it offers a policy relevant framework showing how diaspora elites influence foreign policy, especially in the US and in Indian context also. Promoting a new debate on how non-state actors playing a role in international relations. And thirdly, it emphasized that influence today extends beyond the state and to diaspora networks as well, providing valuable insights for scholars and practitioners alike. Uh, it's a 3 point that I have noted in all over discussion. Also, I have read book only before. Uh, I have some basic questions, but I think before that I continue. I think let's approach to our audience to say something or start their question. So now I open the floor for questions. It's yeah, please. Yeah, Vidya. Yeah, unmute yourself.
Hi, Eva.
Thank
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and
my pleasure.
many congratulations for your first book.
Thank you.
Uh, I'm a PhD student in sociology at University of Bielefeld in Germany. And first, let me apologize that I couldn't read the book yet. But listening your this presentation, I have one methodological question I
Sure.
would like to ask to you. Because especially in anthropology, accessing non-elite is a bit very easy task, but accessing elites is a bit very difficult task. So could you reflect on your methodological such sort of reflection, how one could access the elites? Because it's a very difficult task, especially the elite diaspora.
Yeah, yeah.
What are the material and non-material emotional challenges you have gone through while accessing them? And second, as you also highlighted, this caste intersectionality within diaspora. So I am very eager to know that what constructs elite within caste diaspora in India? Like, do they consider like non-Savarna group as elite within American diaspora, or what are the challenges within the like lower caste community they navigate within the part of the American diaspora, like Indo-American diaspora? So could you say something on that? Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Ma'am, can we continue one on one or we can collect question or
Whatever you suggest.
okay. We can do one to one. So maybe
Okay, so should I start by answering?
yeah. So
Okay. Thank you, Vidya, for the questions. As far as the methodology is concerned, so this was the COVID time. And certainly it was a very challenging time, but one advantage was that the world was functioning online. And in case of, say, firstly, getting across all these elites, so there were these newspaper stories which I'd collected. And again, there were certain names which were featuring again and again. The advantage with elites was that since they are public figures, either heading an organization or a big business group, most of them had their personal websites. So it was easy to collect their contact details, etc. Moreover, most of them had LinkedIn pages also. And I had taken this membership of LinkedIn as well, which came handy actually because many of them I approached through LinkedIn, and I gave like a thorough description as to why I want to interview them, what's the study that I'm conducting. And again, the fortunate thing was that it worked this way. Like, I reached out to one or two interviewees initially. Then they helped me connect to the other interviewees. And that's how it progressed. So, one after the other, then they only helped me to reach out to the other people who were a part of these negotiations. So that's how this issue was resolved. Now, again, like when it came to say talking to them, so I had like, I mean, did a profiling also, profiling in the sense like, what are the areas they had worked in, uh, how like they participated from whatever I could get from the newspaper stories. Fortunately, one of the elites, Swadesh Chatterjee, has also written a autobiography about it, like how this nuclear deal came across. And then in that also, he has mentioned a couple of people who participated. So again, as I said, like, most of them have their own websites. They're available on, say, LinkedIn, etc. So it became easy to reach out to them that way. And moreover, like, because it was COVID, so the world was functioning online. So it was considered, kind of normal that it's okay to, talk to people over, say, a Zoom call or something. The second part, as far as say the caste divide within the Indian American community is concerned, now this is something which most of the interviewees said that it's more of a recent thing. And by recent, they mean that it's something which started particularly after 2000s. And this is also because they pointed out that migration from India has also been, say, migration particularly of certain castes, because only they had that kind of, say, a capital to do so. In fact, one of the interviewees who's been a historian working on the Indian American community, she pointed out that if you look at the case of most of these fellowships or scholarships also, it's predominantly like availed by the upper caste in India. Now, what the interviewees in general they pointed, I mean, some of them they pointed out was that as like the caste dynamics within India change, as education became like say more accessible uh, to everyone. So we see that people from varied castes also begin to migrate, and they also start to get jobs in say the IT sector or in the medical sector and so on. Now, the caste discrimination is something which has unfortunately continued. And a few years back, there was this case of caste discrimination which was filed in the Silicon Valley. Then, of course, the American universities had been proactive. So they were the first ones to recognize caste as a form of discrimination and a punishable offense if it happens on their campuses. Then, of course, Seattle became one of the first like places where it was recognized by the state itself that it's a form of discrimination. One of the more recent cases was of this labor, which I've mentioned in the book also, taken by the Swaminarayan sect to work as construction labor. So they were getting this temple constructed there, and most of them were made to work as bonded labor. But fortunately, one of them managed to say get out from their cringes and managed to reach the authorities in the US. So again, like then actions were taken, the court case was filed, the decision was taken against the sect, and so on. So again, like the caste divide, unfortunately, has traveled with the migrants also, and now the like there are like a couple of say newspaper stories also where they've also discussed that the caste divide is not only is an Indian problem per se, but it's a larger South Asian problem because the system, this I mean thing of caste is there across South Asia. So that is what like that's been pointed out that it's still continuing. And unfortunately, like, I mean, despite the fact that people are like so educated and they are like in the best of the jobs, they've still carried on with the system as like, say, discriminatory as caste. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
uh, there is another question in chat box from
Yeah.
Akansha Kapoor. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this riveting session. With regard to your methodology, I would like to ask you about your own positionality in shaping the research process. Congratulations on the book.
Okay, thank you, Akansha, for the question. So, again, like as I said, like it was studying up and like from whatever literature that already existed on this idea of diaspora and soft power. So again, like, most of it just argues that something is popular, something is getting popular, so it's a source of soft power. So again, like, somewhere we also get carried away with that. But then, like, as you scratch the surface, you realize that it's only a certain section which is exercising soft power. And by positionality, I think you're referring to, like, again, taking a research which is studying up or talking to like people who are higher in authority. So certainly, like as I said, we use techniques to take out themes from their narratives, trying to understand, like, what they're saying and why they're saying in a certain way. So we collated data from multiple sources. The field data was there. Then, of course, the newspaper stories which were there, then of course the other, like, say books, etc., where anyone had been like interviewed or quoted and so on. So we kind of say collated data from multiple sources in order to ensure that the data is valid. It's not just that we're promoting someone's idea or someone's say perspective. It's just like so that's how we went about that. uh, I hope that answers the question.
Hmm. There is another question. Most of the questions are coming from chat. So, uh, question by Anurag Khan. As a specter of Khalistan and episodes such as the apparent life attempt on alleged separatists like Panus and the subsequent claims of Indian interference in the American affairs affected the image of Indian diaspora as the fifth columnist for Indian intelligence. It's a
Okay, so I would put it this way. Like I mentioned, that we need to realize that the engagement of Indian government with diaspora in different communities countries is also different. So, despite the fact that US and Canada share such a peaceful long border, Indian government's engagement with the diaspora in Canada and with the diaspora in the US is very different. Again, because if we look at the diaspora in the US, there's a large section of the diaspora which is very pro, like say India. Not like you wouldn't find that many say Khalistani sympathizers amongst them, which is more in context of the diaspora in Canada. So again, like in case of Canada, yes, it has impacted, but then the engagement of the Indian government is also different. Not so much in context of the diaspora in the US. And like I said, for the diaspora also, a lot of say the decisions or say what they support and not are determined by the fact that what their life is in the US. So obviously, like their choices are determined or like they try to be in line with the American value systems, because obviously since they're living there, that's what determines their choices and reality.
there's another question on methodology part by
Yeah.
Ms. Sayari. What are the key challenges researchers face when using narrative analysis as a methodology? And how do online interviews affect the quality of data collection in this approach? Are there more effective alternatives to overcome these limitations?
Okay, so collecting data online, yes. From an ethnographer's perspective, one would say that the component of observation goes absolutely missing. Because obviously you're not on the field, you're not observing their daily lives and the developments and so on. But the other advantage was that as I said, like this happened during the COVID times. So working online was absolutely normalized. Moreover, most of the interviewees, they would like talk at their convenient time. For example, say after coming back from office, or they'll take out time on the weekend to talk. And many of them would just talk at length. At length, by that I mean like, they'll be giving all those detailed anecdotes, etc. So again, somewhere that comfort factor was there when it came to say talking online. So that in a way, like simplified data collection, and then of course using narrative analysis. Now again, this was deliberately brought in because otherwise, like how to understand, like, what they're saying and why they're saying. Because the way a person would use certain phrases to, refer to something, or the way a person would, like, the tone in the person in which the person would actually say something. So, that kind of a analysis was essential, because again, as I said, COVID times, it was being carried out. So again, these were the ways with which we could, like, say, minimalize any kind of, say, methodological shortcomings. I wouldn't say that it's completely done away with, but then yes, this was the best possible way to actually minimalize it.
Okay. There is a congratulations note by Dr. Bhakti Gala
Thank you.
on your publication. And one question from Tapan Kumar Sethi. Thank you
Yeah.
for the
Yes, sir.
insightful book.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
I think Tapan is saying,
My name is Tapan Kumar Sethi. So I want to ask you, ma'am, one question.
yeah,
Uh, Thank you for this insightful book, ma'am.
yeah.
Could you kindly share a concrete example where Indian American elites have played a decisive role in shaping U.S. foreign policy?
Okay. Okay, so by shaping US foreign policy, I think that referring to particularly, say, shaping policy towards India. And again, we can go back to the nuclear deal. So I actually cut down a lot when I discussed, like, how the advocacy campaigns were carried out. So they were carried out in multiple phases. Again, like when I say that these people had personal rapport with the congressmen, because they were the primary fundraisers for all these congressmen. So again, what they would do is that, they would talk it out. So in the interviews, and as mentioned in the book also, many of these conversations are mentioned where they are trying to convince all these congressmen. So like in case of Swadesh Chatterjee, which he mentioned in his own book also, he started by talking to this North Carolina congressman called Jesse Helms. And when Helms for the very first time had heard about the, say, Pokhran 2, so the reaction was that, like he said, India has not simply shot himself in the foot, but maybe in the head itself, because it was being looked upon as a dead end that, India-US relations cannot go any further. Now, this was a very interesting period because in North Carolina, the Indian American population is quite big. And many, by this time, the late 1990s, had acquired American citizenship. And which meant that they will vote in the elections and so on. So again, they had to, say, squeeze out space and time to talk to Jesse Helms. Initially, there was a reluctance on both the ends, but eventually they saw, like, what was beneficial for both. So for Helms, it meant that, winning this seat in North Carolina, for the Indian American elites, it meant that, this could also play an important role in shaping India-US relations. So this was just one congressman I'm talking about. There were many other, and this was just one incident where, they would talk it out, convince them, reason it out with them, and so on. And that is how it happened in context of the nuclear deal as well. So they would approach all these different people, conduct fundraisers for them. In fact, even in the recently concluded elections and so on, the Indian Americans have been very active in conducting fundraisers. And it's a very acceptable practice in the US. So obviously, when you have someone who is funding your election so well, why would you not listen to them when it comes to, say, making policy decisions? And in case of Indian Americans, contemporarily, they are across the parties. It's not that they're doing it only for the Democrats or the Republicans. They are across the parties, which is what makes them very significant and influential in terms of policy decisions.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
I also have a question, ma'am, regarding the
Yeah.
regarding the inequalities among the diaspora communities, because there are diverse communities that are who are living in the US.
Yeah.
So, did you find any kind of discriminatory approach within the diaspora communities while dealing with the particular issues on uh, they uh, how they think about the Indian community itself.
Okay, so this is something which has, say, transitioned from time to time, also depending upon India's relations with the US, India's stand in global politics, and several other factors. So, as I like mentioned, the case of food also, like that also became a site which would reflect, like, how much of acceptance India and Indian community there has received, and so on. Now, the interesting thing was like all these Indian restaurants and Indian food stores started to open in the US since the 1970s because the number of Indian Americans was increasing. But in this phase, the clientele was predominantly Indian. And again, like as many other scholars have also pointed out, the food that they would serve will also be like, not something like which would like be up to the mark. And this was also because like they would never have these professional chefs from India going there and serving Indian food at that point of time. Moreover, if we look at references to Indian food in American shows and programs and films also, they would associate like things like strong smell, bad odor with Indian food and very spicy. The Indians use a lot of curry masala, which is something they say it's not good for the health and so on. Now, over a period of time, this thing has slowly transformed. And interestingly, that happened as India US relations transformed. But then again, like, Indians also, on one hand, we had like these professional chefs which were like going to the US, starting their own restaurants. And then, of course, I mean, there are stories like that of Vikas Khanna and all. Then, of course, there was this interesting story of this small food chain, which tried to like bring that side of Indian community or Indian food, which was more say easily acceptable to the Americans, like the chaat. So the charts became very popular because it's like a grab and go approach. They can just take it and travel and eat and so on. So again, at a very small level, I would say, like, these transitions have happened. I would still not say ki it's completely like I mean, say assimilated or completely accepted. But yet, yes, there are like changes which has happened. The acceptance has grown over a period of time. Something which was evident in these pictures also. So Smithsonian had this interesting photo exhibition, an online exhibition about the Indian American community that also like reflected how the transitions have happened. So they have like gathered photos from the early, like say the 18th century, 19th century, and so on. So you see pictures where you see Indians within the Indian community. But as we come to more recent times, there are pictures of Indians getting, say, married across different communities and so on. Of course, like, a growing, say, representation of the Indians in multiple ways and so on. So, again, that thing has transformed from time to time. I cannot say that it will stay this way forever. Again, it will be dependent on multiple factors, like I said, how the relations are between the two states, how this community is individually perceived, and so on. So, multiple factors will keep shaping it, I believe.
Uh, Thank you, man. For I think we can conclude now. So
Okay.
uh, actually, we have thank you, ma'am, for the whole and this good session. Actually, it's a very enlightening session. Actually, this book is, I think, is both timely and innovative. It pushes us to think different about the mechanics of influence of international politics. Remind us that power today is not only wield by state, but also by the network of diaspora elites who spread to worlds. For scholars, it is valuable theoretical intervention also. To for practitioners, it offers practical insights into the complexity of the policy making in the interconnected age as well. And before I conclude, I have to actually announce two things. And first is that we have another session next week in speaking from margin, and which is about the book discussion is fragile hope seeking justice for hate crimes in India. It's a award-winning work on legal anthropology that received the prestigious James Bustill Prize for Human Rights Scholarship from the Royal Asiatic Society. And second, we are just trying to start a tribal series on speaking from margin group. So on that note, I'm it's a final thing. On that note, I want to congratulate ma'am for your book, and I hope that you will get some very you get some insight from our discussion. Uh,
Yeah. So thank you
uh,
everyone who's taken out time to join. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. I won't name everyone, but yes, it means a lot that you all have taken out time to join this discussion. It's very encouraging for first timers like me. Genuinely, I feel so. And thanks a ton to the team at Speaking from Margin. It's a great initiative. Initially, I always used to see only the posters. I never knew that, one day I'll be a part of it too. But thanks to all of you for this support, for this appreciation. It means a lot. Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Lawrence, and our team members as well, and our participants for making it such an amazing and engaging session. I hope we will connect further and do such insightful discussions again. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations on the book again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Let's
I think,
conclude this.
yeah, okay, okay. Bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much again.